All right, well, I'll get us introduced here. So I'm Rebecca Dingus. We have Jana Carpenter from University of Northern Arizona and Dennis DiPasquale from University of Florida. And we're going to present an exercise that really could be used in just about any sales course in one context or another, and talk about, it could be related to goal setting, could be related to motivation, to coaching, and to discussing different conversion rates. So Jana's going to start us off by introducing, hopefully, what she's done through industry and what she gained in her experience as a sales manager for the financial services industry, correct? And I'll let her get started, and then Dennis will tie it into coaching, and I'll wrap us back up.
Okay, cool. So the idea behind this, and as you know, the first group, I suppose you could do this as an exercise with students as well. But the idea is that when you're coaching someone, in my experience, is that what you want to do is have your coachee come to the realization of what is the corrective action themselves. And really what we talked about in our dinner speaker was the idea that the only thing we really can control are the activities that lead to the results that then lead to the objectives. So this is an exercise that I did on a basis in the beginning of the year with my folks as we set their quota and we talked about what they were willing to commit to, and then if they were in a slump or if they were struggling or when they're brand new, to help them understand how to get up to speed. And so the idea in our industry, there's about, you sort of use 30% as the key. So if you make X amount of calls, you're going to convert 30% of them to appointments. Of those appointments, somebody's going to no-show about 10%. Then you've got 30% of those, if you have a good close ratio, that you're going to convert into business. Then you've got deal size, et cetera. So what I would do is I would sit down with my salespeople and we'd take a look at this. We had various requirements. After years of studying and loving Salesforce, I found that the people who did well, even when they were senior salespeople, still made 100 cold calls a week. And those were a mix of cold and warm because they had clients, et cetera. So I sort of start out with this as the basic premise. So I've got someone in front of me, and let's just assume they're in a slump or they're relatively new. I would go back and I would look at their statistics, and I might find that they're only making 80 sales calls. And for some reason, they just are not closing anything. They're not doing our 30%. They're like, what's going on? You're only closing 10% of the deals. So they would come into my office, and we'll try a couple another one. And their deals are tiny. Our average deal in our company is $13,000. They're like right here. So what you do, and you sort of say, look at it. So here, this is your statistics, and so you're just not going to make your quota, which is $1.5 million. So employee, let's brainstorm. Let's take a look at the data. And let's decide, what is it that you can really control in terms of your territory? You could make some more calls. What do you think? How many more do you think you could make? Well, I know I'm supposed to be making 100, but I really hate cold calling. I said, okay, well then let's just leave that. If this is the number that you're comfortable with, that's all right. Let's see what else we might be able to do. Let's just look at your whole base of activity. So I see that you're doing pretty well in terms of the people that you connect with and converting those. How good are you? How good are that? I mean, do you think that there's something there? Well, I noticed that Joe, when I look at his numbers, because I make all this available to all the salespeople, he's getting 50% of them. Well, do you want to spend some time with Joe? I'd like to, because he's doing something I'm not doing. Well, what do you think that might do for you? Well, I'm not as good as he is, but maybe it would raise me by, I don't know, maybe like 10%. He's at 50, maybe I'd get to 40. Okay, that's cool. So now you can see we're closing the delta. So can't really do no-shows, they just happen. And how many, sometimes everybody shows up for appointments, but usually one person, you get to the lobby of the building and they forgot about the appointment, they don't have time for you, and so I don't know if there's nothing we can do about that. So now we've got I noticed that your average deal is 8,000, and our company average is 13. What's going on? Tell me a little bit about your deals. Let's look at your individual deals, and you go into depth with them. That's interesting. So why didn't you charge them for? Why didn't you bring a partner in on that who charges $400 an hour as opposed to bringing in a staff person that you quoted them at that number? Well, I was afraid they couldn't spend that much money, whatever. So now you've got an opportunity to coach people. You want to work on that? Because I got some ideas for you. Would you be willing to commit to trying to reach our standard deal? Yeah, I could do that. Okay, so now we're back up to what our standard deal is, and now we're projecting a weekly sales, and you're still behind. So I've got you working here. I gave you 5 weeks where you're just not, working. I mean, or it's vacations, or we're in training. He said, oh, well, I'm willing to work harder. I'm not going to take a vacation this year. Are you sure about that, whatever? Yeah, I can work more weeks. Okay, so what should this be? He said, let's make that 50. I won't take a vacation. We got training, whatever. So now we've made that smaller. We're still not there. Now what? What do you want to do? Oh, damn, I guess I have to make more calls. So you don't, whatever it is, it's some combination. Or I might say, you know what? You don't like cold calling. I got some different products that you could be selling that average around $25,000. We're doing the cost segregations now. The tax law just changed. That's really hot. What do you think about that? Would you be willing to learn that? Absolutely. So, it's this idea that you do it with them. There's only so many things that they can control. But, now they're selling bigger deals, and so they've almost got their quota. And you continue to do it with them until they decide, and out of that, you make a plan that they commit to. Here's the things I'm going to train with Brian, I'm going to learn the cost seg, and blah, whatever it is. And you're going to help me on qualifying so that I get more deals. So they're doing it, I actually have them do the computer too. I just talk them through it. That's it. And not everybody does cold calls anymore. I don't know about all your companies that your sponsors are, but you could do this with a combination of meeting people at networking, using LinkedIn Navigator, email campaigns. We actually, in our industry, found out we got more appointments out of emailing and then following up with a call. So whatever would work in any industry. So that's it.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jana. So moving on from this, it's all fine and dandy to coach them through this, but why should they do any of this? Scott, why do you think they should do any of this?
Because I told them to.
Because they told them to? That's it? That's it? Jess, what do you think?
I think you're showing them what their expectations
Okay.
is huge for millennials.
So why should Jana's employee make those 80 to 100 cold calls, though? At the very basic, why?
You don't make calls.
You don't get the sales, and if you don't get the sales, you don't make quota, you get fired, or at least you don't get paid. So if you want to coach them and you want to give them something to work for, you've got to think about your compensation and your motivation and how you're going to get them there. The problem is, are all salespeople created the same in terms of their performance? No. So you've got, generally speaking, 3 types of salespeople that you might be looking at. At the lower end, you've got your laggards. At the high end, you've got your stars. And in the middle, you've got your core. So, just like you have your product portfolio, you've got your portfolio of employees. So if you really want to move the needle, if you really want to push your revenue up, who do you think you really have got to work to coach? The core, absolutely. So, and that's what the research shows. Unfortunately, that's not what a lot of people do. So, in terms of how many you've got in your organization, you've got that bell curve that we like to see out in research. So, before we talk about the core, let's talk about these other people. So, here you have your stars. Stars are, your overachievers. I'm a bad speller. They're the ones who are they want that money. Now, we know not everyone's motivated by money these days, especially if we talk about intergenerational differences. You see the research shows that millennials are more quality of life, more so than past generations. So, they may not be in here, at least right away. So, but generally you've got your overachievers, your high performers. If you were a manager, you were probably that star. So let's look at laggards. Of the three, your laggards are your most heterogeneous group. So you could have good laggards and you can have bad laggards. It's like Wizard of Oz. Are you a good witch or are you a bad witch? And you're not going to know until you invest a little bit of time into them. So you could have your new hires. So put that up there, your new hires, your new people, or your old people. I'm not talking about old in age, but old in tenure. So they've gotten complacent. They're done with it. Maybe they're looking at that. Or you've got your individuals who are in a slump. Something might be happening in their life. You've just got to work with them. And then your core, the bulk of your core are just those people who are, they're doing what they need to do. Maybe they're not as motivated by the money, but you still want to kind of push them in there. So now, hopefully, your firm looks at least something like this, or maybe they have a little bit on the right. But if your firm looks a little bit more like this, you've got big problems. So hopefully you don't look like that. Either way, you're trying to push people over into that direction. So how do you do that? How do you motivate these individuals? So, like I said, with your stars, you don't have to do much. Just what you want to do is you want to do things that are going to avoid getting them to stop. So the biggest thing you want to avoid with those stars is having a cap at commission. You've got a cap at commission, they hit that cap, they're done. What's their motivation to really go forward? So if your firm's got those caps, get rid of them. So with that, you can also think of maybe an overachiever pay. Now, what you can do with core is a number of different things. You can kind of have different compensation mixes. One would be a more tiered style of compensation. So the more you make, the more compensation you get, the more variable pay, the more commission. Another thing that can sometimes work with the core are prizes, contests. Now, prizes and contests can be very problematic because who's going to win a prize or a contest? Your stars are going to win. So why are your core going to go for it? So what you might see at some firms, so Gartner, for example, Gartner has different levels of contests. And that gets there to get the core motivated with the basic 500 club or whatever, and that's just a financial goal, a revenue goal. Then they've got, say, I can't remember, but I've heard elite club or something along those lines, and that's a top percentage. So that's always a moving target. And that can still motivate your stars to go for them if they're motivated by those prizes. So you've got that. But the real problem is, what do you do about these guys? So what we've seen is, first of all, when you're looking at goals with laggards, so you're looking at your goals, you might see your annual performance base with your core and your stars. Well, if we look at this chart, this is where you might want to go down into more of a quarterly style. If they're not performing here, then maybe some quarterly bonuses will keep them on point, looking at making sure they're getting there week to week to week as you're coaching them through this process. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing, and it can sometimes work with contests as well, is social pressure. So if you've got a good, healthy, competitive group, then you can use social pressures to say, hey, I want to be part of the rest of everything else. So, Disney song, I want to be part of your world. So to do that, you can also use those contests. And it's a single anecdotal story, but a new salesperson came into Gartner, and he likes to talk to my students about this. And that first year, at the very end of the year, he didn't make that 500 club. Everyone else was making that 500 club. It was not that hard of a contest to get into. So he's sitting there at January 31st, getting ready to celebrate New Year's, and like, well, everyone's all clinking their wine glasses, and I'm sitting here and I can't do that, and I can't join them. Another method is to use those leaderboards to show, hey, you're down here, you're not with the rest of the group. So positive social pressures can help motivate those individuals. So generally speaking, anything you can do to work with them and motivate them in positive ways to kind of push forward. So hopefully you've got these new people. Of course, they've got a lot less expectations. You shouldn't be setting the $1.5 million quota for the new people if that's the core. So hopefully you're working with them, giving them the appropriate training. And eventually, You just got to get rid of them if they're not really performing. They're dragging the organization down. You don't want to create the social norm that is down here, and that can work against you as well. So these are just some of the things you can do to motivate the different performers and motivate and get them to produce a little bit more, and of course work with the coaching to make sure you're not just saying do it and you'll make the money. Here's how to do it. And you've got to use coaching. This pipeline coaching is a great way to do it. Any questions?
Okay, so as you can tell from how even just what we presented in 12 minutes is how in-depth you could take this. And as we were talking about different topics yesterday to present today, we talked about coaching, we talked about motivating, we talked about how to help your salespeople deal with rejection, how to think about different compensation structures, how to anything, you name the topic, you can relate it into this. So this is an exercise we think you could develop this into a case study. Here's your sales force, here's their experience, here's their past history. Now go through, work the numbers, see where you can help them improve, what activities they are able to control that you can motivate them through. And we think this could be presented in the beginning of the semester to set the tone for that, and also, as Jess said, bring it home with how real this is. I know in our intro to sales class, we tend to talk so much about you're going to hear no so much, handling rejection, these failure rates. Let's talk about these conversion rates and the way we can take that positive spin on improvement as well, I think is a motivating way. And then another idea onto this is integrating it with your guest speakers, with your corporate partners or sponsors. As your students are interacting with them, they can get to know those companies. What are their industry standards? So here Jana was presenting her industry standards from her experience. What's going to happen in other industries? What about inside versus outside sales? And these different roles that they could be even in as salespeople as we're thinking that through and then managing accordingly. So we hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, let us know.